I was 16 when my dad sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he was getting married again. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the spaghetti sauce we had for dinner, but the plates had already been cleared away. My dad kept rubbing his hands together like he was nervous. That alone was unusual. He had always been the calm one, the steady one, especially after my mom passed away 3 years earlier. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, "there's something I want to talk to you about." I remember sitting across from him, twisting the sleeve of my sweater around my fingers. Since my mom died, every serious conversation felt heavy, like it carried the possibility of more bad news. "I've been seeing someone," he continued. I blinked, surprised, but not upset. I actually felt something close to relief. My dad had spent years drifting around the house like a ghost. He worked, came home, and watched TV until he fell asleep. The laughter that used to fill the house when my mom was alive had disappeared completely. "What's her name?" I asked. "Carla." He smiled when he said her name, a soft smile I hadn't seen in a long time. It made me realize just how lonely he must have been. "That's good, Dad," I said slowly. "I'm happy for you." And I meant it. For the first time since my mom died, I thought maybe things could start getting better. A few weeks later, he introduced us. Carla arrived at our house on a Saturday afternoon carrying a bottle of wine and a bright, polished smile. She was pretty in a very deliberate way. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture. She hugged my dad the moment she walked in, wrapping her arms around him like they had been together forever. "This must be Emily," she said warmly, turning toward me. Her voice was sweet, but there was something about the way her eyes scanned me that made me feel like I was being evaluated. "Yes," my dad said proudly. "This is my girl." Carla hugged me too. Her perfume was strong, floral, and overwhelming. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "We're going to be a real family." At the time, I smiled politely and believed her. In the beginning, everything seemed normal enough. Carla started coming over more often for dinners and movie nights. She laughed loudly at my dad's jokes and touched his arm whenever she talked to him. My dad seemed happier than he had been in years. But slowly, small things started changing. At first, they were so subtle, I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. One evening during dinner, I mentioned my mom's lasagna recipe. "My mom used to add extra garlic," I said. "It made it taste amazing." Carla paused mid-bite. "Oh," she said with a small laugh, "I'm sure it was good, but maybe we shouldn't keep comparing everything to the past." The table went quiet. My dad cleared his throat and changed the subject. I didn't think much about it then. But moments like that kept happening. If I talked about my mom, Carla would smile tightly. If my dad and I shared a memory about her, Carla suddenly had somewhere else to be or something else to talk about. Soon, the changes started becoming more direct. One afternoon, Carla came into the living room while I was doing homework. "Emily," she said gently, sitting down across from me. "Can I give you a little advice?" I looked up. "Sure. You're a lovely girl, but you're very quiet." I shrugged. "I guess." "It can come across as cold," she continued. "People might think you're judging them." I stared at her, confused. I had always been a quiet person, but no one had ever suggested it was a problem. "I'm not judging anyone," I said. She smiled again, that practiced smile. "I know, sweetheart. I'm just trying to help." The first time my dad took her side was during a conversation about curfew. I had always been allowed to stay out until 10 on school nights. But one evening, Carla mentioned casually, "10 feels a little late for a 16-year-old." My dad frowned. "Maybe 9 would be better," she added. I laughed a little, assuming my dad would brush it off. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "You know, that might not be a bad idea." I stared at him. "Wait, seriously?" He looked slightly uncomfortable but shrugged. "Carla's just looking out for you." That became his new sentence. Whenever Carla criticized something about me, whenever she changed a rule, whenever she made a comment that made me feel small, "Carla's just trying to help." Within months, it felt like I was living in someone else's house. Carla started reorganizing everything, the kitchen cabinets, the living room furniture, even the hallway where family photos hung. One day I came home from school and noticed something missing. My mom's large framed portrait that used to hang above the fireplace was gone. I looked around the living room, my chest tightening. "Dad?" I called. He walked in from the kitchen. "Yeah? Where's Mom's picture?" He hesitated. "Oh, Carla thought it might be better to move some things around." "Move it where?" "I think she put it in the hallway closet for now." For now. I didn't say anything, but something inside me cracked a little that day. The worst moment happened a few weeks later. I couldn't sleep that night and went downstairs to get some water. As I reached the hallway, I heard Carla and my dad talking in the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard my name. "She's always around," Carla said quietly. I froze. "She lives here," my dad replied. "I know, but sometimes it feels like she's competing with me." "Competing? With you?" my dad asked, sounding confused. "Yes," Carla said. "You treat her like she's still the center of your world." My heart started pounding. There was a long pause. Then Carla said something that made my stomach twist. "You need to stop letting her control your life." Another long silence. I waited. I expected my dad to laugh it off, to tell her she was being ridiculous. Instead, he sighed. "You're right." Two quiet words, but they hit harder than anything else. I backed away slowly before they could see me standing there. When I got back to my room, I sat on my bed staring at the wall for a long time. I thought about how things used to be before Carla, when my dad and I would cook dinner together, when we'd talk about school, movies, or random things for hours. Back then, I never questioned whether he loved me. Now I wasn't so sure. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew even more. My dad started spending most of his time with Carla. If I walked into a room while they were talking, the conversation would stop. If I tried to join them, it felt like I was interrupting something. Eventually, I stopped trying. One night, I sat alone in my room and realized something painful. My dad hadn't stopped loving me, but he had stopped choosing me. And when you're 16, that realization feels like the ground disappearing beneath your feet. That was the moment I understood something I wasn't ready to accept yet. My dad didn't lose me. He chose someone else. And that choice would shape the next 12 years of my life. After my dad and Carla got married, the house started changing in ways that felt small at first, but slowly became impossible to ignore. It happened gradually, like someone quietly rewriting the story of our home while I was still living inside it. Carla officially moved in 2 weeks after the wedding. I remember the day clearly because she arrived with boxes labeled in perfect handwriting and a sense of authority that made it feel like she had always belonged there. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I told myself this was normal. Families change. People adjust. But Carla didn't just move into the house. She reshaped it. The first thing that disappeared were the photos. My mom's pictures had always been everywhere. On the hallway wall, on the bookshelf in the living room, on the side table next to the couch. Some were from vacations, some from birthdays, and some were simple, everyday photos where she was laughing at something behind the camera. One afternoon, I came home from school and noticed the hallway wall looked empty. I stopped in the middle of the hallway. Where there had once been 6 framed photos of my mom, there were now 3 generic landscape paintings. My chest tightened. I walked into the living room and found Carla rearranging flowers on the coffee table. "Carla," I said slowly, "where are the pictures?" She didn't even look surprised. "Oh, those," she said casually. "I packed them away." "Packed them away?" "Yes. I just thought it would help us move forward if we refreshed the space a little." Refreshed the space. "That's my mom," I said quietly. Carla finally turned to look at me. "And she'll always be your mom," she said in a voice that sounded patient, almost rehearsed. "But this is a new chapter for all of us." I didn't argue. I didn't know how. Instead, I waited until my dad got home that evening. "Dad," I said as he walked into the kitchen. Carla took down Mom's pictures. He looked tired from work and loosened his tie before answering. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, she mentioned she was redecorating." "So, you're okay with that?" He shrugged. "I mean, they're not gone. She just moved them." Where? Closet, I think. Closet. Like they were decorations that didn't match the room anymore. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so important to me could feel so small to him. But that was just the beginning. A few weeks later, I came home from school and noticed something else missing. My quilt. It had always been on my bed since I was little. My mom had sewn it herself when I was 8 years old. Each square had a different pattern. Flowers, stars, soft pastel colors she had picked out carefully. When I was younger, she used to tuck me in with it every night. After she died, it became the one thing that made my room feel safe. Now it was gone. I searched the house, my heartbeat picking up with every room I checked. Finally, I found Carla in the kitchen again, sipping tea. "Have you seen my quilt?" I asked. She looked up thoughtfully. "Oh, the old one." "Old one." "Yes," I said. "The one that was on my bed." Carla took another sip of tea like the question wasn't important. "I donated it." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. "You what?" "It was worn out," she said calmly. "And honestly, it didn't match the room anymore." My hand started shaking. "That quilt was made by my mom." Carla tilted her head slightly. "Well, it's just a blanket, Emily. Someone else probably needed it more. Just a blanket." I felt something burning in my chest, something hot and helpless. When my dad got home, I told him what happened. "Carla gave away Mom's quilt," I said. He frowned slightly. "Why would she do that?" "She said it was old." He rubbed his forehead. "I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." "Dad, that was the last thing Mom made for me." He sighed, like the conversation was exhausting. "It's just a blanket." Just a blanket. That sentence stayed with me for a long time. After that, I stopped expecting him to understand. The house kept changing. Carla replaced furniture. She repainted the walls. Even the smell of the house changed, from my mom's vanilla candles to Carla's sharp lavender air fresheners. But the biggest change wasn't the decorations. It was the atmosphere. Carla had a way of making me feel like I was constantly doing something wrong. If I stayed in my room too much, she'd comment about me being antisocial. If I watched TV in the living room, she'd sigh like I was invading her space. If I talked about school or friends during dinner, she'd steer the conversation back to herself. My dad always sat there quietly, nodding along. Eventually, I started spending as little time in the house as possible. I stayed late at school for study groups. I picked up a part-time job at a small cafe near campus. The cafe became my favorite place in the world. It smelled like coffee and cinnamon, and nobody there treated me like I was an inconvenience. Meanwhile, at home, Carla had started planting a new idea in my dad's mind: independence. One evening during dinner, she said it casually while pushing vegetables around her plate. "You know," she said, "Emily is almost 18. My dad nodded absent-mindedly. "Yeah, it might be good for her to start learning independence." I kept my eyes on my food, pretending not to listen. "What do you mean?" my dad asked. "Well," Carla said lightly, "a lot of kids move out after high school. It helps them grow." I looked up at my dad. He didn't respond immediately, but I could see the thought forming in his mind. That conversation kept repeating itself over the next few months, little comments here and there. "She should learn responsibility. Kids need to stand on their own. It's healthy to leave the nest." Every time she said it, my dad looked more convinced. 2 months after my 18th birthday, he knocked on my bedroom door. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw his face. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat on the edge of my bed in awkward silence. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Carla and I have been talking." My stomach dropped. "We think it might be good for you to start your own life." "Start your own life. Are you kicking me out?" I asked quietly. "No, no," he said quickly. "Not like that." But that was exactly what it was. "You're an adult now," he continued. "It's time to take responsibility." I stared at him, waiting for something more. Some reassurance. Some support. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "There's $300 in here," he said. $300. For 18 years of being his daughter, I packed my things that night in silence. 2 suitcases. That was everything I owned. My dad stood awkwardly by the door while I zipped them closed. Carla leaned against the hallway wall, watching quietly. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. If anything, she looked relieved. When I walked toward the door, my dad hugged me briefly. "Call sometimes," he said, like I was leaving for college, not being pushed out of my own home. I stepped outside into the cool night air with my suitcases. Behind me, the door closed. And just like that, the house where I had grown up was no longer mine. The first night after I left my dad's house, I slept on my friend Jenna's couch. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of her refrigerator in the next room, trying to process how quickly my life had changed. Just a few hours earlier, I had still technically had a home. Now, everything I owned was stuffed into 2 suitcases sitting beside the couch. Jenna had hugged me the moment I showed up at her door. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. But I knew she didn't mean forever. No one ever does. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. I worked as many hours as the cafe would give me, sometimes opening in the early morning and closing late at night. Between shifts, I tried to figure out what my next move was supposed to be. Community college seemed like the only realistic option. A counselor helped me apply for financial aid and a few small grants. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. During the day, I attended classes. At night, I worked. And somewhere in between, I tried to build a future out of nothing. Jenna's couch turned into a month, then 2. Eventually, I started feeling like a burden. She never said it directly, but I noticed the small things. The way she hesitated when I came home late. The way her parents asked gentle questions about my plans. I knew I had to leave before my welcome wore out. After 3 months, I found a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. The rent was cheap because the place smelled faintly like detergent all the time, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors' phone conversations word for word. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, I didn't have any furniture except a used mattress someone from the cafe helped me carry upstairs. I sat on the floor, eating instant noodles and staring at the blank walls. For a moment, the loneliness hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. I thought about my dad's house, about the kitchen table where we used to eat dinner together, about how easily I had been replaced. I cried that night, quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear, not because I missed the house, but because I missed the father I thought I had. The first year on my own was brutal. There were weeks when I barely had enough money for groceries after paying rent. I learned quickly how to stretch a bag of rice and canned soup for days. I walked everywhere because I couldn't afford a car. If something broke, I fixed it myself or lived without it. Some nights I collapsed into bed so exhausted that I didn't even remember falling asleep. But little by little, things started changing. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something I desperately needed: direction. For the first time, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. I chose marketing as my major after realizing I liked the creative side of business: branding, storytelling, understanding how people think. My professors noticed I worked harder than most students. One of them pulled me aside after class one day. "You've got real potential," he said. "Have you thought about transferring to a university after this?" The idea seemed impossible at first. University meant money I didn't have. But he helped me apply for scholarships anyway. Somehow, against all odds, I got one. It didn't cover everything, but it covered enough. The day I received the acceptance letter, I sat on the steps outside my apartment building and stared at it for 10 straight minutes. For the first time since leaving my dad's house, I felt something close to pride. Meanwhile, my dad's life seemed to be moving in a completely different direction. I didn't hear from him much, but social media filled in the gaps. Carla posted constantly photos of family vacations, holiday dinners, birthday parties. At some point, she and my dad had 2 kids together, my half-siblings, a little boy and a little girl. I saw their pictures online before I even knew their names. In every photo, my dad looked happy, relaxed, like the last few years had been easy. There was one Christmas picture that stuck with me. Carla stood beside the tree holding their baby daughter, while my dad held their son on his shoulders. Everyone was smiling. The caption read, "Our perfect little family." I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I was jealous of the kids, but because there wasn't a single trace that I had ever existed in that house. At first, I still tried to stay connected. On my dad's birthday, I sent a text. "Happy birthday, Dad. Hope you're doing well." Sometimes he replied, "Thanks." Other times, nothing. On Christmas one year, I called him. He answered after the fourth ring. "Hey," he said, sounding distracted. "Merry Christmas," I told him. "Yeah, you too." I could hear kids laughing in the background and Carla talking to someone. "We're kind of busy right now," he added quickly. "Oh, okay. We'll talk later." Later never came. After a few years, I stopped reaching out. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It just happened gradually. Every unanswered text, every missed call, every reminder that I was no longer part of his life. Eventually, I realized something important. I was the only one trying. And relationships can't survive when only one person is holding them together. So I let go. Instead of waiting for him to care, I focused on building a life where his absence didn't define me. I finished community college, transferred to university, graduated with a marketing degree. My first real job was at a small marketing firm downtown. The pay wasn't great, but it was stable. For the first time, I had health insurance, a steady paycheck, a future. A few years later, I moved to a better company with better pay. Then another promotion. By the time I turned 28, my life looked completely different from the one I had imagined when I was 18 and standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases. I had my own apartment in a quiet building with big windows. I bought my first car. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. More importantly, I had peace. No one criticized the way I lived. No one made me feel like an inconvenience. I had friends who felt more like family than the one I grew up with. And slowly, the anger I carried for years started fading. Not because what happened didn't matter, but because I was finally too busy living my own life to keep reliving the past. 12 years passed like that. No calls. No visits. No father. Sometimes I wondered if he ever thought about me. But most days, I didn't think about him at all. Then one random Tuesday afternoon, while I was sitting at my desk finishing a report, my phone buzzed. I glanced down casually and froze. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in years. Dad. For a moment, I just stared at it, wondering if I was imagining things. 12 years of silence. And suddenly, he was calling. The phone kept vibrating on my desk while I stared at the screen. Dad. I hadn't seen that name light up my phone in years. For a moment, I honestly thought it might be a mistake, maybe a pocket dial or the wrong contact. The vibration stopped. I exhaled slowly, feeling an unexpected mix of emotions I hadn't felt in a long time. Confusion, curiosity, a faint, almost embarrassing flicker of hope. Then the phone started ringing again. He was calling a second time. That alone told me it wasn't an accident. My hand hovered over the phone. A dozen thoughts raced through my head at once. What could he possibly want after 12 years? Was something wrong? Was someone hurt? Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me, the part that had spent years hoping he'd remember I existed, reached for the phone. I answered before I could change my mind. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade spoke quietly. "Hey, kiddo." The word hit me like a wave of memories. Kiddo. He used to call me that when I was little, when we watched movies together on the couch, when he helped me with homework, when life still felt simple. For a second, I didn't know what to say. "Hi," I finally replied. He cleared his throat. It's it's been a while." That was an understatement. "Yeah," I said. The silence that followed was thick and awkward, like two strangers trying to remember how they used to know each other. "So," he said eventually, "how have you been?" The question felt almost surreal. How had I been? Where had he been when the answer actually mattered? "I'm good," I said simply. "I heard you work in marketing now." I frowned slightly. "How did you hear that?" "Oh, someone mentioned it. I think I saw something online." It sounded vague and unconvincing, but I let it go. "That's right," I said. I work for a company downtown. That's great, he said quickly. I always knew you were smart. The compliment felt strange, coming from someone who hadn't been part of my life for 12 years. Thanks. Another long pause settled over the conversation. It felt like both of us were circling around the real reason for the call. Finally, he spoke again. Listen, he said slowly, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. I know things didn't end well between us. That was one way to describe it. I've made some mistakes, he continued. A lot of mistakes. I didn't interrupt. I should have reached out sooner, he said. I should have tried harder. For a brief moment, something inside my chest softened. 12 years was a long time to wait for those words. But then he continued talking. Things have been difficult recently. There it was. The shift in tone. The real reason. What kind of difficult? I asked. He hesitated. Carla and I, we're not together anymore. I blinked. You mean you're divorced? Yeah. The word hung in the air between us. Apparently, their perfect little family hadn't been so perfect after all. When did that happen? I asked. About 6 months ago. 6 months. And he was just calling me now. What happened? I asked. He sighed heavily. We'd been having problems for years, he admitted. We just kept pretending everything was fine for the kids. The kids. My half-siblings. She ended up filing for divorce, he continued. The court gave her the house. You lost the house? Yeah. His voice sounded tired now, older. And the kids? I asked. They live with her most of the time. I could hear the bitterness in his voice. It reminded me of the loneliness I heard in it years ago after my mom died. But this time, something about it felt different, calculated. So, where are you living? I asked. With a friend for now. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Another pause followed. Then he said it. I was wondering if we could talk about something. I had been expecting that sentence since the moment he called. What kind of something? Well, I've been trying to get back on my feet, but things have been tight financially. There it was. The full picture. I thought maybe, he continued carefully, I could stay with you for a little while. The words landed heavily in the quiet room. I didn't respond right away. Instead, memories started surfacing, memories I hadn't thought about in years, standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, the envelope with $300, the door closing behind me. Now he wanted to stay with me. Just temporarily, he added quickly. Until I find a new place. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. 12 years. 12 years without a phone call, without a visit, without even asking if I was okay. And now he needed something. Please, he said quietly. You're my daughter. The sentence echoed in my head. You're my daughter. For years, I had waited to hear him say something like that, back when I was 18 and struggling to survive on my own, back when I was working 2 jobs and sleeping on a friend's couch, back when I still believed he might show up and help, but he hadn't. He had been busy building a new family. I thought about the Christmas photos, the vacations, the captions about their perfect life. Kacha sucks, kitai kinainyor sacha. I thought about the nights I went to sleep hungry because I couldn't afford groceries, about the mornings I walked to work in the rain because I couldn't afford a car. He hadn't been there for any of it. Emily? He said cautiously. I realized I hadn't spoken for almost a full minute. I'm here, I replied. I know this is a lot to ask, he said. But I didn't know who else to call. That part was probably true. Carla was gone. The house was gone. The life he chose over me had disappeared. And suddenly, he remembered he had a daughter. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was angry, but because I needed to be honest with myself about what this moment really meant. This wasn't reconciliation. This wasn't regret. This was convenience. He needed help, and I was the last option left. Please, he said again softly, just for a little while. I sat there in silence, remembering the girl I used to be, The one who would have said yes instantly. The one who still believed love meant sacrificing everything. But that girl had spent 12 years learning how to survive without him, and the woman I had become understood something she didn't. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they're entitled to your life. For a few seconds after he finished speaking, the line was completely silent. I could hear faint background noise on his end, maybe a television, maybe traffic outside, but neither of us said anything. It felt like the entire conversation had reached a moment that would decide everything that came after. "Emily?" he said carefully. "I'm here." My voice sounded calm, almost detached, but inside my chest, something heavy was shifting. Not anger exactly. Not sadness either. More like clarity. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if my dad ever called again. I had pictured emotional conversations, apologies, maybe even some kind of reconciliation. But this moment wasn't anything like the version my younger self used to dream about. It was simpler than that. He needed something, and I was finally in a position where I could decide whether to give it to him. "Dad," I said slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Where were you when I needed you?" The question hung between us. For a moment, I wondered if the call had dropped because he didn't respond right away. What do you mean?" he said eventually. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling above my desk. "I mean when I was 18 and you told me to leave the house." Silence. "When I was sleeping on Jenna's couch because I had nowhere else to go." Still silence. "When I was working 2 jobs and trying to pay for school." My voice remained steady, but each sentence felt like opening a drawer full of memories I had spent years trying to close. "Did you ever think about where I was living?" I asked. I I assumed you were okay," he said weakly. Assumed. I let out a small breath. "Did you ever call to check?" "No." "Did you ever visit?" "No." "Did you ever ask if I needed help?" He didn't answer that one. The quiet on the other end of the line said enough. For a long time, I had told myself there must have been some explanation, some complicated reason why my father disappeared from my life. But standing here now, listening to him struggle for answers, the truth felt painfully simple. He hadn't thought about it. "Carla made things complicated," he said finally, his voice defensive now. "You know how she was." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I considered letting that excuse pass, but I had spent too many years accepting explanations that weren't good enough. "You were my father," I said gently. "Yes. Not Carla." That sentence seemed to land harder than anything else I had said. "I know," he replied quietly. I continued before I could lose my nerve. "When she threw away Mom's quilt, do you remember that?" There was a pause. "Vaguely." "Do you remember what you said when I told you?" "I don't." "You said it was just a blanket." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth after so many years. "That was the last thing Mom made for me," I said softly. "And you told me it didn't matter." Another silence. This one was longer. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded different, smaller. "I made mistakes," he said. Yes, he did. But mistakes weren't the whole story. Mistakes happen once. Choices happen again and again. "You didn't just make mistakes," I said quietly. "You made decisions." He didn't argue with that. "I chose Carla," he admitted after a moment. Hearing him say it out loud felt strangely relieving. At least we were finally being honest. "I thought if I made her happy, everything would work out," he continued. "I thought you'd understand." I almost laughed. "Understand what?" That he traded one family for another? That he believed I would quietly disappear and build a life without him? "I was 18, I said. "I didn't understand anything. I was just trying to survive." The words hung in the air between us. For the first time since the call started, he sounded genuinely emotional. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology came out in a rush, like he had been holding it back for years. "I should have been there for you. I should have protected you. I should have, I don't know, done something." Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. The strange thing was, it didn't matter as much as I thought it would, because apologies don't change the past, and they don't automatically earn a place in someone's future. I appreciate you saying that, I told him honestly. Then, does that mean— No. The word came out before he finished the sentence. There was a long pause. So that's it? He asked quietly. I took a deep breath. For years, I had imagined this moment being full of anger or tears, but instead, I felt something else. Peace. I spent 12 years building a life without you, I said. You didn't have to— I did, I interrupted gently. I had to learn how to take care of myself, how to trust people again, how to stop feeling like I was someone who could be thrown away. He didn't respond. And now, I continued, I finally have a life that feels stable. I looked around my office as I spoke. The desk, the window, the quiet sense of security I had worked so hard to build. I'm not willing to risk that, I said. You think living with you would ruin your life? He asked, sounding hurt. No, I said. But I think it would reopen parts of my life I've spent years healing. That was the truth. Letting him move in wouldn't just be offering him a place to stay. It would be inviting the past back into my present, and I had worked too hard to escape it. I don't have anywhere else to go, he said softly. For a moment, guilt flickered inside me. But then another memory surfaced. Me standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, not knowing where I would sleep that night. He hadn't asked that question then. Dad, I said gently, I hope you find somewhere to stay. But it won't be with me. The silence that followed felt heavier than any part of the conversation so far. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded defeated. I guess I deserve that. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. I do hope things get better for you, I added. And surprisingly, I meant it, because holding on to anger for the rest of my life wouldn't help either of us. But forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it just means letting go. Well, he said after a moment, I'm glad you're doing okay. Thank you. Another pause. Then he said something that almost made me smile. You sound strong. I thought about everything that had happened over the past 12 years. The couch I slept on, the tiny apartment above the laundromat, the nights I wondered if I would ever feel safe again. Yeah, I said quietly. I guess I am. We sat there in silence for another moment before the conversation finally came to an end. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly and stared at it for a few seconds. I expected to feel something overwhelming. Guilt, regret, maybe even sadness. But instead, what I felt was something lighter, relief. For 12 years, my dad had chosen someone else over me. And for 12 years, I had been the girl waiting for him to realize what he lost. But that girl was gone. Now I was someone else. Someone who understood her own worth. Someone who knew that love shouldn't require begging to be seen. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. And in that moment, I realized something important. Being abandoned didn't make me weak. It forced me to become someone strong enough to stand on my own. And that strength was something no one could ever take away from me again.